Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I am your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we are going to explore the GAP and C&O Trail that connects Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C. and makes for a great week-long camping and cycling adventure. These trails attract bucket list adventurers from all around the world, and they get about 1 million visitors a year. Located on the East Coast, they have particular interest to me. The GAP Trail is short for the Great Allegheny Passage, which is a 150-mile trail that runs from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Cumberland, Maryland. The Chesapeake and Ohio National Canal Trail, or the C&O for short, then goes from Cumberland to Washington, D.C. for another 184.5 miles. When you pair these two together, the GAP and the C&O trails make for an awesome 334.5 mile trail from Pittsburgh all the way to DC. Both of these are historic trails originally built to facilitate industries such as coal and lumber. Our guest today is Patrick Gray, a fellow adventurer. Pat is someone who loves to work hard and play hard. He's a family man from Fort Mill, South Carolina. He makes his living as an innovator in digital consulting with ACOM, but when he's not working, he loves to find an adventure. As an explorer, Pat's somebody who strives to be competent in many aspects of life rather than an expert in a narrow set. Last year, feeling constrained from stay-at-home orders, Pat decided to head out on a solo journey to tackle the GAP and the C&O trails on his bike over the course of a week. And I am thrilled to have him here with us to share that story. Pat, welcome to the campfire, my friend.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, super pumped. We had coffee not too long ago, and you were telling me about this trail, and I didn't even know it existed, and I was immediately intrigued by it. And I'm just super excited to hear all about the journey. So just to give our listeners a little bit of context, can you just tell us a little bit about who Pat Gray is and what life is like for him here in Fort Mill, South Carolina?
Sure. So I'm, as you mentioned, a family man. I have 3 children. We all try and get outside whenever we can. And prior to all the COVID stuff, I was unfortunate and sometimes unwitting frequent traveler. So spent hundreds of days, plying the friendly and not so friendly skies, staying in hotels, all that stuff.
Right.
And then COVID came along and just everything shut down. And, we went from, I think 2019, I did 100 plus flights to 2 in 2020. So had this very weird, shift in kind of my schedule, shift in the way I was working. Most of my work was going out and seeing clients, and as my one of my kids put it in one of those little Father's Day things that you take home in preschool, my job was to stay in hotels and talk to people. And all of a sudden that changed quite a bit. So, I think the genesis of the bike trip was, I think I went in late 2019, and it was kind of in the midst of COVID mania, and I was like, I gotta do something.
Feeling a little cooped up
and kind of tired of all the uncertainty. We were at work kind of in our 5th, like we're going back to work, we're going to reopen everything, and then something would spike, and it was nope, scrap that plan. And just kind of stuck a little bit and feeling feeling that stuckness and that need to get out of the house a little bit and go on an adventure.
Yeah. And I kind of, I love on this podcast to delve into the kind of the internal motivations. And I want to go get a little bit deeper on that. But before we do that, can you just tell us kind of how you found the GAP and the C&O trails, and, any history you want to share, anything that sort of attracted to you to that particular trail?
Yeah, I think it at some point somebody got me one of those calendars back when calendars were a thing, where you'd have like the thing of the day. And I always liked Far Side ones as a kid, but I think my wife got me one that was like an adventure a day or something. And it had, various hikes and all these elaborate things, from, going, climbing some Kilimanjaro in your case, or going Antarctica or something. But then, I found at some point one was the C&O and GAP Trail. And I think, at that point it may still be, it was like the longest contiguous bike trail in the US. I was like, oh, that's something kind of in my backyard. I'm going to file that in my, I
Yeah.
have a little list of future adventures that I keep on my phone. And it probably sat there for, 10 years or whatever. And then I was kind of sitting around and getting a little rammy during COVID. And I was like, let me look at my adventure list. And I was like, this, I could get there quickly. It's relatively close. It's not going to take a, elaborate series of equipment or planning or fitness or anything like that. Let's make it happen. And the more I researched it, kind of the more excited I got. My great grandfather, I don't know if he worked on that specific railroad, but he was a railroad guy in Pennsylvania. I have family from that part of the world. My other great grandfather was a coal miner, and I think ultimately died of black lung. So
Yeah.
I had this kind of industrial, like Pennsylvania coal country
Yeah.
story in the family, and just loved the idea of the railroad. I've always been fascinated by these big transportation networks that, people had to go and carve and scrap out of this emerging country. And, I love that idea of, riding the iron horse across the country, and goods and people and all this stuff being transported, and, cowboys robbing the trains, and kind of all that frontier mythology that I grew up with. So it was just this kind of natural build of interest.
Yeah. So does the trail run alongside the railroad or
So
the
the gap
tracks?
is the actual railroad bed.
Okay.
So I think most of the tracks have been pulled up. There's a
Okay.
few towns you go through where the stations are still there. So, you literally kind of wheel into town and hit the train station. And then when it switches to the C&O, what I never really knew, I just, kind of took it as a matter of course. Hey, it's this thing called the C&O towpath. Then I started researching. I was like, what the heck is a towpath? And it turns out there was a canal built from DC, and
Mhm.
ultimately they were going to try and get to Pittsburgh. And there's a series of manual locks. So this was before electrification or before widespread steam power, I guess. And they would have these barges that would go up the canal, and they would have mules on the towpath, like they were literally walking down the path towing
Oh,
these
wow.
barges.
The mules are pulling the barges basically.
Yep. So
Wow.
the towpath was very appropriately named,
Wow.
since you have
Yeah.
these mules towing barges. And I think there's like 100 or there were 100 plus, almost 200 locks along this pathway, and each one of them had a house. And there would be, you would sign up to go and be a lock keeper, and you bring your family, go to this house, you get a little plot for land for a garden, and you would just hang out there. And at any point, 24/7, someone could roll up with their barge and they'd yell locky, and the guy would have to come out and operate all the locks and bring the barge to the next level and send them on their way. So it was, this really interesting story of, what kind of people would live there and who would be attracted to that kind of job. And, there were still native peoples around that would come and potentially raid your little lock house. So just this really
Yeah.
cool frontier story with that side of the trail as well.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's amazing history. I'm like, how long ago was that sort of put out of commission?
I think the C&O kind of became obsolete when the railroad got all the way down to DC. So there
Got it.
was,
Yeah.
I don't know if it was official or kind of an unofficial race essentially,
Yeah.
but it was kind of a contest to see if the railroad could connect Pittsburgh and DC, or the locks
Yeah.
could connect them first.
Yeah.
So, they were literally, the lock guys or the canal guys would see the railroad guys kind of building the railroad track while they were trying to get that canal north as fast as they could.
Yeah.
And the railroad ultimately won out. So the canal kind of became obsolete relatively quickly. And then I think the railroad ran till the 50s or
Yeah.
60s.
So cool. Okay, so like for you as an adventurer tackling this, like what is the terrain like? What is that? I mean, are you going through cities? Is it nature? Is it what, walk us through kind of what that is like.
Yeah, so it's in terms of a bike ride, it's super easy, particularly for that. That area gets a little hilly, but since it was a railroad bed and a thing for bringing barges up a river,
Mm.
they chose very light grades. I think the steepest grade is maybe 3%.
Okay.
So super easy. You kind of go from town to town in the beginning, and you almost take this this kind of deindustrialization tour. You start in Pittsburgh, and you're
Yep.
going through the steel yards and the railroad yards, and it's kind of very industrial. Then you get to some smaller towns along the way, and then you ultimately go through a state park. And I can't remember the name of the state park, but it's, you feel like it's one of those things that you feel like you're the only person in the world.
Yeah.
uh, by virtue of being on the East Coast, in 10 minutes someone rides by on a bicycle with a boombox, and you're like, I guess I'm not the only person in the world, but you do get that feeling. And I saw a bear, I saw all sorts of wildlife. So it's this nice feeling of kind of quietness and solitude, especially when you get away from the towns.
Yeah. Oh, so where did you see bear?
I saw a bear in that park, and I saw two
Um,
cubs cross the path in front of
yeah.
me and then cross the path the other way. And I was like, uh-oh, I don't know which side mama's on. And hopefully she's not on the other side. So I, took a break and had a Cliff Bar, and then, rang my little bell and yelled quite a bit, and went a little faster there just in case mama and the cubs were separated. But
Yeah, they probably can run faster than you can, but maybe you can ride faster than they can run. I
it
don't
felt good to put a little heat on. If nothing else, it was a good panacea.
Yeah, but it's essentially a gravel path, is that right?
Yeah, it's a gravel path. The gap is very smooth. It's
Yep.
really nicely graded. I mean, it's probably smoother than your average major urban road. There's
Yep.
no potholes. It's nice pea gravel. The gap gets a little rougher, but there's nothing. I had a gravel bike, so
Got
you
it.
don't need a mountain bike or anything like that. You could probably ride the
Yep.
whole thing, and I know some people have ridden the whole thing on like a racing road bike. So
Cool.
it's pretty easy.
And camping at night?
Yeah, so the Gap has both commercial and some free campsites, and then you get on the C&O, the whole park is actually, or the whole trail is actually a national park.
Yeah.
And I think
That's
it's like the longest, narrowest national park, or has some superlative like that.
Yeah.
But every 15-ish miles, there's a campground set up by the Park Service,
Okay.
and they're all free, and they all have water, which some of the water was working, some of it wasn't, but for the most part, they have water. They have an outhouse, they have a fire ring, and they have space for probably five or six tents. So
Okay.
there's this whole infrastructure there. It's super easy. If you don't like the look of one site, you can kind of keep going to the other.
Yep.
On the Gap, each of the trail towns generally have a place you can stay for free, whether it's kind of the town square, or some of them had a little area they had built to facilitate bicycle campers. So really easy and generally nice infrastructure. And you generally hit a town every 4 or 5 hours, so you can stop and have lunch. You can have dinner in towns. I generally did lunch and dinner in town, and then would do breakfast in camp.
Got it. Yeah, I was going to ask you about like food supplies. You really sounds like you don't really need to carry anything with you because there's enough places to stop along the way.
Yeah, the Gap, you definitely don't need to carry anything with you. When you get to the C&O, it's a little more, there aren't really any trail towns. I think
Yeah.
there were a couple, but for the southern part of the Gap, it's a little more rural. You can kind of shoot off and go into town if you need to, but that was, I think I did 2 or 3 dinners that I had packed in
Got it.
and cooked in camp. But on the Gap, it was all a nice end of the day burger and a cold adult beverage.
There you go. So how many nights did it take you to do this trip?
I think it was 5 or 6 nights.
Okay.
And I wasn't in any particular hurry. I probably averaged 40 miles a day.
Okay. And logistics, did you have your own bike? How did that work? And how did you start and stop?
Yeah, I had my own bike. I think there's a couple of companies that rent bikes, but I kind of like geeking out in the gear a little bit.
Yep.
So set up a touring bike and did a one-way car rental that ended up being super cheap. There is Amtrak service into both Pittsburgh and D.C, and they have some of the routes have bike cars, but I think like $60, $70. I got a one-way rental, rented a little SUV, and just threw my bike in the back. Drove up to Pittsburgh, was able to abandon my rental car right at the start of the Gap, essentially near the Amtrak station, and then I stayed in a hotel for the night. Wheeled my bike up to my room, and then first thing in the morning, got out and got after it.
Very cool. And where does it end in DC?
So it ends in DC in Georgetown, essentially.
Awesome.
And then DC has a pretty good, collection of bike routes, both on and off road. And what I've heard a lot of people do is they park at the airport, and there's a bike trail that goes all the way out to Reagan. So you can do that. Or I just rode to Amtrak, and there was an Amtrak that went back to Charlotte that had a bicycle car.
Oh, nice. So you actually took Amtrak home instead of taking yeah, that's the way to go. I actually had an opportunity to do that recently. It is a very comfortable way to travel, surprisingly. So it sounds like a lot of fun. I mean, if you live on the East Coast, it seems like it's a super easy trip to tackle doesn't sound like it sounds like there's a lot more peace than there is, fear, anxiety, any of that kind of stuff. But I'm curious, were there any sort of moments of resistance or any kind of interesting encounters that you had along the way?
No, I mean, everyone was friendly. Everyone was great. There were, you'd realize you were getting close to a town when you'd see, a few people out kind of tooling around on bikes. And then, as you got closer, you'd see people out walking. I had I think on day one, I had an unleashed dog incident, which, have a dog, love dogs, but really get frustrated with people that don't have their dogs on leashes. And, it started as they all do with some guy yelling, "Oh, they're very friendly." And then one, of course, bit me in the ankle.
Uh,
Didn't really break the skin. I just kind of carried on. It seemed like more trouble than it was worth to stop and do all that nonsense. And then as I got closer to DC, there were a couple of ran into some rather strange family that was, I don't know what they were doing, but there was a dad with an axe and some kids carrying logs that had one of the little kids had a weird comment about throwing me in the lake, which was strange.
okay.
And other than that, it was still kind of peak pandemic, so everyone was fine. And then the closer I got to DC, like people would be coming on the trail, and I literally had a few people like jump off and throw their masks on, and it was like I was coming down with radioactive ooze dripping out of my nose. That's kind of the state of the world at that point. And it was post kind of post the riots in DC, so things were still boarded up. That was a little weird.
It was a strange time, right?
Yeah, it was definitely sort of a welcome back to reality in this weird twilight zone we were in at the time.
Well, and I mean, specifically for you, because part of the motivation was like, I want to try to go back to something normal. Like I'm cooped up in the house and I need to get out. And you being kind of a pioneering explorer, you probably kind of felt it earlier than some people did.
Yeah. And I love things, kind of long distance, anything long distance and human powered, because it takes life down to its essentials. You're out there, and I'm sure someone could do the math on how many pedal strokes it would take you to do that distance. But it's just, you have a goal that's kind of big, and it's big enough to be a little bit frightening, but small enough that it's achievable. And the way you get there is you just keep pedaling. There's just this very clear thing you've got to do to keep maintaining forward momentum. And, yes, it's hard, and yes, it takes a long time, but it's, kind of strips life down to the essence. There's no one, on social media telling you can or can't do it. There's no one, trying to politicize it. It's just, you get on your bike and you pedal and you go as far as you feel like going, and throw your tent up and do it again the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm curious, like this particular adventure, and I love that you talked about your adventure list, because I think that's something, like just by virtue of having an adventure list, like that obviously creates sort of this inspiration and a reminder to get after it. But like, what is it about this particular type of adventure for you, being on the bike, being alone? I kind of want to hear about that, because you could have chosen to go with others, but you chose to kind of go tackle this adventure on your own. And I'm just kind of curious, what was the inspiration behind that, and what it was like to be out there on your own for a whole week.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like the bicycle out of all the, I've done long motorcycle trips, I've done long hikes, but the bicycle kind of gives you, enough of the mechanical advantage that you can cover some ground, but it's not, you're still human powered.
Yeah.
And there's just, I think it's hard not to smile when you're on a bicycle. Like, I've done some like fitness stuff on a bicycle. You and I have done some triathlons, and I've, sat in the garage and gutted it out and grimaced through training stuff. But, when you're just out and you're not trying to do any of that, and you're like, I'm 40 and I'm on a friggin' bicycle. Like it's possible not to be smiling and happy. Like you're doing it wrong if you're not doing that. So the bicycle element, I think, was kind of a key piece. And then, the alone thing was partially, couldn't figure out logistics, asked a few people and didn't have a lot of interest. And I was just like, I gotta do this. I gotta spend some time in my head and kind of sort things out and figure out, how I'm gonna get through this and how I'm going to kind of get my own mind right, because I got a family of 4 other people that need to, have that anchor in the family.
Yep. Yeah. So, love to just dig a little deeper on that. You said, you're going to spend some time in your head, and we want to get our mind right. Like what do we need to get right? What are we hoping to bring back?
Yeah. I mean, I think at that point it was just this sense of stasis.
Mm,
Usually I have a plan. Usually I have, some kind of vague trajectory on how to get there. But at this point, with everything that was going on with the COVID stuff, with, job uncertainty and all that, it was just like, I'm not sure how to break out of the stasis. And if I keep sitting around doing the same thing every day, that's certainly not going to do it. There's the old definition of insanity. So it's like, what can I do to break out of this?
yeah.
That's, not going and nailing some cocktails every night, or not going and doing, sitting around and eating bonbons.
Right.
So, I think nature has always been a source of, calm and of challenge for me. So I was like, let me get out. It's long enough to kind of flip the script, and short enough that I won't get thrown out of the family for going away too long.
Yeah. So I want to kind of hear like, so what that was sort of the motivation. Like, did you get what you were looking for while you were out there?
Yeah. Yeah. I came back. I saw an old friend at the end of the trail in DC,
Nice.
Sean, who So,
Nice. Yes.
that was a nice reconnection. I think I thought a lot about just the world. I thought a lot about, the US. There's a lot going on, and just seeing, like, as a country, we had done hard things. We had people that said, let's go and dig a freaking canal from DC to Pittsburgh. I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of cool that you could rally people to do that. And at an individual level, there are people that would just go out and they're like, I'm going to pick up my shovel and dig a freaking canal
Yeah.
all day. I don't know how long it took, but seeing that something had, that part of our history was still there and was just out for anyone to explore. It kind of restored some of my faith in humanity and in the US, and just, kind of got me back on the right spot. And I was like, all right, I'm ready to kind of deal with this thing. And it's either going to be another day or 100 days, or 100 years, but I'm kind of ready to go for it.
Yeah. And was there any sort of, I mean, I think you had to have felt a sense of accomplishment when this thing was over, but a lot of times, most often that sense of accomplishment comes after some pain and some suffering. Like, what what was that pain and suffering, or was there any along the way?
I don't think there wasn't any like acute, physical pain. I was in pretty good shape at the time. And,
Yeah.
I think my first day I had planned to do like 60 miles. And at the end of 60, I was like feeling good, and just rode 80. And then I took a little short day the next day. I, hit some cold weather that kind of surprised me. And this was early October, and I had planned for, maybe a little bit of a chill. And I think it dipped down to like 30 when I was up at kind of up by the Continental Divide, and woke up with snow in my tent. So that was a little bit chilly in the morning, but, there was no like major, physical challenges along the way. Just, it was more the peace, like being able to sit there for, 6-8 hours and just kind of pedal at a constant rate, and, be lost in nature and kind of lost in your own thoughts is, it was definitely a nice and well appreciated time.
Well, and I know that you're somebody that, that like that freezing cold, the snow. I mean, some people might have called that the challenge and the suffering, right? But like, you're somebody that this isn't your first rodeo. You've been on other adventures and other trips. And, those are the kinds of things, like, the more you do these things, the more you just like, you roll with the punches. And I think that's just kind of an example of who you are. And so I'm sure that there was, but you're just so good at kind of like rolling with it into the next phase. But the trip sounds like it was super rejuvenating for you. That's kind of what I'm sensing. Did you have any sort of people interactions along the way, or was this just you yourself and you?
Yeah, I did ride with one guy for I think like a day and a half.
Yeah.
I kind of saw him at lunch, and then we just sort of bumped into each other and settled into the same pace, and, shot the bull a little while, which was kind of a neat feature of the trail, and then ended up staying at the same town towards the end in Pennsylvania, and that was kind of his last night. But we, went out for pizza and had a beer, and, I think we exchanged a couple text messages after. But it was just sort of one of those temporary trail buddies. And I'm sure
Yeah.
we talked
Yeah.
about the meaning of life, and, some very deep thing. And, we're kind of, souls in traveling together, but then, kind of went our separate ways, which is, I guess a neat thing, and maybe a sad thing sometimes about these types of adventures. You kind of meet these people, and then they just sort of float back into the ether. But I think
They
that's,
do, but they stay with you because it's like the memory of it, I mean, and nature does do that to you. It just kind of puts you in this calm, peaceful state. And when you meet people like that, It's
Yeah.
it sticks with you. And so one thing I thought is really cool, like what I love about this trip is this isn't like, it's not like climbing Mount Everest. There's a challenge to this, right? And it's fun, but it's like it seems like it's a very doable trip for a lot of people. It seems like it's something that's kind of like, hey, I can go do that. I think, and I think that's what I really like about it. You said that you felt like a calm and a challenge. Um, and I love that. On this podcast, we love to talk about the word awe. And the awe is, definition of awe that I love most is the reverential respect mixed with fear or wonder. And I feel like the fear or wonder, those two things combined are sort of like the calm and the challenge that you're talking about. It's like the combination of those two elements that makes it so unique. So, like, did you have any moments along the trip where you felt that sort of feeling of awe?
Yeah, there were definitely several. One that there's the Big Savage Tunnel is kind of one of the
Mm,
high points on the trail, and it's this huge tunnel. It was some engineering marvel at the time, and carved out of rock and all this stuff. But you kind of hit it as you're going up. It's like a 20-mile climb, and
yeah,
it's 2-3% grade, so you're not climbing. Some big Tour de France climb or anything. You're,
yeah,
you're just sort of doing this little grind, but then you get to this, tunnel, and you can see where it's like been hammered out of rock. It's not
yeah,
like a thing where there's cement on the walls or anything. And you come out the other side and there's this big vista over the valley. And it was a cold morning. So it was a little chilly, and, bones were a little stiff getting going. And then you go through this tunnel, and again, kind of that whole feeling like a kid on a bicycle. Like I was, yelling so it would echo, and I was making train noises and choo-chooing. And then you come through and it's like this huge vista. And it was just like, okay, this is pretty awesome. This is the mountain medicine, or whatever you want to call it, out in nature, or
yeah.
something spiritual out there. But
What is that feeling? Like, what's that feeling like?
yeah, I think it's just a feeling that you're part of something larger, and that you're, for me, it's you're connected to everything, but you're also, kind of your own
Yeah,
being. You're an individual gear, but you're still in this much larger machine, and
I
it's
love that.
it's
You're
a
you're part of something bigger, but yet you're there to witness it.
Yeah, and it's, you don't have to judge it. You don't have to question the why or the how. Like, you can just sit there and sort of be,
Yeah,
which I think is hard. I think, our jobs are oriented around making decisions and
yeah,
judging and processing, and, putting things in different buckets. And this was
yeah,
just a case of like, this is here, I'm here, and I
yeah.
don't have to file anything or understand it, or make a judgment on it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And one thing, like I've known you for a long time, and I've seen you take lots of different adventures and tackle all kinds of different ventures. And you've always been a really good writer, and you've always written about a lot of your experiences. And I know you kept a journal on this one. And this isn't something we really talk about that much on this podcast, but like I wonder if you could just talk about like the value of like writing about the experience and how it helps you to process the experience and make it even more powerful for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think on this one, I kept a pretty brief journal and tried to take a lot of pictures, and tried
Mhm.
to, be conscious about what I was taking pictures of, and, tried to stop, and one of my intents going into it was to do some photography, which I think is different than just like, I'm going to run around and take pictures with my iPhone. And, I
Yeah.
did some of that as well. But then I think going back after, and kind of thinking through, how do I want to tell this story? Why did I go on this adventure? And I asked myself some of the same questions you're asking me, and then
Yeah.
kind of wrote down the story as, partially as I experienced it, but then kind of went back and tried to fit it all together. And I think that, gives you the chance to relive the adventure a little bit, and
Yeah.
to, maybe see some threads that you didn't see while you were out there, or to, kind of make some conclusions that maybe you didn't make while you were in the midst of it. So, I've always enjoyed writing. I do a lot of writing professionally, but
Mhm.
don't get to sit around and write about an adventure. So that's kind of a fun activity.
Yes. Yes. So, Pat, how has the trip changed you? How did you come back? Whenever we go on a trip like this, we start out as one person and we finish, a different person. What did this trip do for you?
Yeah, I think it did a few things. Kind of in the immediate term, it was like, all right, I got out of the house, got out and did something, and kind of, sweated some of the evil out, and that sort of thing. In the longer term, it's something I want to do with my family. As you mentioned earlier, I think pretty much anyone that can hop on a bicycle and
Yeah.
pedal could do this trip.
Yeah.
The stops are close enough that if you can, even if it takes you 8 hours to ride 10 miles, you can
Right.
go and do it. And it might take you 2 or 3 weeks, but you'd have a heck of a good time.
Yeah.
If you had the right attitude. So want to go back with the kids and do some or all of it at some point in the near future. Kind of solidified my desire to have at least an annual adventure, whether kind of with the family or solo or with a friend. And then just, I think a lot of the contemplative time on the bike sort of convinced me that, it's good to be self-aware, and it's good to kind of understand what's going on in your head and try and keep it in a positive way, but also, being present and being around others, and, seeing your, kind of seeing yourself as part of that larger community and trying to fit into that. So, after that, I think I started watching the news less and started worrying less about all the cruft that I think is manufactured sometimes out there to keep.
We don't need any of it.
Doing a certain thing. I was like, yeah, hey, there, whenever I get frustrated, I'd be like, there's a big ass tunnel in the middle of a mountain in Pennsylvania that's been there for 100 and some odd years, and it's just sitting there, not judging anyone and waiting for me to come back the next time. So
yeah, just get on a bike and go get lost for a week. I think that sounds amazing. I'm super excited about this trip. It's definitely something that I would like to do at some point. Something I know about you is, like, you've always, we all have a voice inside that calls us to adventure. You absolutely have a voice inside that calls you to adventure, and you're really good at listening to it. What advice do you have for people that maybe need to listen a bit harder or are having trouble? Maybe they hear the voice and maybe they're having a hard time not letting the worry thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I've always tried to be open to different experiences.
Yeah.
And, I think for whatever reason, the natural tendency of a lot of people is when something comes along to, start through the mental exercise of, here's the 406 reasons why I can't do that.
Yeah.
And I've, I don't know if it came naturally or if it's something I kind of groomed throughout my life, but when something comes along, I'm like, okay, let me ask myself why instead of why not. What could I learn from this, or why shouldn't I do this? I had a trip recently for work to go to Saudi Arabia, and my initial reaction was like, why the heck would I want to go ride a plane for 18 hours and go to this country that I'd heard all these terrible things about? Right. And so I was like, let's go check this place out. It's 2 weeks of your life. It'll do something good for your job. So I think just having that, have your initial reaction be why not? And then, I think most of our excuses, short of if you had some, if you're completely immobile or something, this trip would kind of be out of the books or out of the list of options. But if you're generally mobile, you have enough means or enough friends to borrow a bicycle of any sort, you could do this thing on a garage sale Huffy that you get for $20. Ask yourself why not, and just go out and try it. And even if this type of adventure is too big, go and find something smaller. If you're listening to this podcast, you're like, hey, I'd love to go on a 5-day bicycle adventure, but here's some legitimate reasons why I can't. Go take a ride in the neighborhood. Hop on that bike that maybe you haven't hopped on for a while, or if you're some super cyclist, training for the pro tour, get on the beach cruiser and just feel that joy of being on two wheels, and ideally do it with one of your kids. That definitely emphasizes the fact that, hey, I'm on a bicycle and it's hard not to have some fun doing this. So I think that's been the key driver for me, is just always asking why not, instead of coming up with that list of reasons why it's not a good idea.
Why not? I love it. That's perfect. Okay, so just to pivot real quick, because something that you've done as an innovator and an adventurer is you have a YouTube channel called The Big Heavy, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was another why not. So I posted a video a couple of years ago. I tiled my workshop floor, and thought nothing of it. I shared it with a few family members, and came back and I had like 200 subscribers or something like that. I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So I did an update video to the tile floor, and then I write some technology leadership columns, and somebody sent me some battery packs to review, and I was like, oh, I'll put a YouTube video together, and got a whole bunch of views and started getting subscribers, and always was interested in media and communications and this sort of thing. So I'm like, oh, I'll start a YouTube channel and see what happens.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and it's just so interesting to see the content that takes off versus what doesn't. But that's just been another adventure for you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've tried to intentionally create this sort of tapestry life where there's 100 different things that interest me that I can engage with versus just getting kind of buried in one. And I sometimes envy and sometimes fear those people that are like, hey, when I was 2 years old, I knew I wanted to be a veterinary neurosurgeon and
Yeah.
dedicated my life to that, and good for them. But I'm definitely not wired that way.
I think that's so funny, and I love what you said. You called it a tapestry life, because I think I do value people that really focus on mastery. I think that folks that have one thing that they're really dialed in on and they're really passionate about, like it's super super inspiring. But I know for me personally, I tend to be more of an explorer, and I kind of thrive on new experiences. And one of the bullets that you sent me for introduction was that you're someone who strives to be competent in many aspects of life rather than just be an expert in a narrow set. And I loved that. I think that's cool. Like I think a lot of us think we're supposed to be good at one thing, but I think that's not necessarily the case for all people. I think some of us would prefer that variety as opposed to just dialing in on one thing. I think that's really cool that you were able to bring that to the forefront.
Yeah, we kind of lost our way somewhere with like everyone loves the Tiger Woods story. And it's like,
Yeah.
hey, he did 6 billion hours of golf by the time he was, 4 years old. And his
Yeah.
dad made him like eat his, Wheaties with a golf club and all this crazy stuff. Like, clearly worked out for Tiger, I
Yeah.
guess. I've never spoken with him, so I agree.
Yeah,
But
and it's okay. That's his journey. That's perfectly
yeah,
okay, but it's also perfectly okay to be an explorer and to look for adventures and to take on new experiences. So Pat, whether it's this bike trip on the GAP and C&O Trail, or maybe it's a story of all of the many adventures that you have, you've got an incredible life. And at some point, Hollywood is going to make a movie about your life. And I want to know, when they do, who's going to be the Hollywood actor that's going to play you.
it'd absolutely be Bruce Willis.
Nice.
Before the
Awesome.
before his recent troubles, but not Die Hard 1 Bruce Willis. He still was pretty handsome and put together. It'd be like Die Hard 3 or 4 Bruce Willis, where he's kind of lost
Nice.
his hair, he's graying a little bit, a
I
little
love
more
it. That's
weathered.
awesome. Cool. And so what's your movie going to be called?
Big Dumb Animal Rides a Bike.
Big Dumb Animal Rides a Bike, starring Bruce Willis. I think he would play that. I think he would take that on. He's done a lot of goofy movies. I think that title works.
It'd be loosely inspired by a true story. It'd have that little disclaimer at the beginning because we need some East German terrorists and some big explosions. That would be a critical element.
I love it. Well, Pat, thank you so much for talking with me today. And for those listening, I hope you have been inspired today as much as I have. I hope that Pat's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or you need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Pat, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. And go ride a bike and put a smile on your face.
Love it.